Okay, welcome back. This is video 2 over the Enlightenment. In this video, I'm going to be going over the individual philosophers or the people associated with the Enlightenment, the ones that were writing and thinking about ways that they could change society and get rid of an absolute monarch and instead have a constitutional state where power came from the people and the people could have individual rights as well. So we're going to go through some different philosophers or different enlightened thinkers. And we can like fill in a description of like how they relate to the Enlightenment in the box. You don't need to write down everything about the people. I'm going to try to pinpoint the main things about each one. The one we're beginning with is Thomas Hobbes, and I don't have him on the list because he is not actually an enlightened thinker. He's associated with the Enlightenment, but he does not share a lot of the same views that other enlightened thinkers do. So if you want to like, I don't know, like write him in the margin or at the bottom, you can. And then we'll be able to evaluate like, is this actually enlightened? So the first person I have associated with the Enlightenment is Thomas Hobbes. He is English and he is alive like kind of before the Enlightenment starts. And there we go. He wrote a book called The Leviathan. And in that book, he posed the question, like, what is man like in his natural state? Like, if we were all cavemen living outside in the wild, what would we be like in our like truest form at our base nature? What would that be? And his answer to that question is like, in our natural state, we're bad. We're prone to war and conflict. If we were living in the wild, we'd always be fighting. And he calls humans solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So again, like in our basic state, we're bad. In order to live in a functioning society, we need to submit to an authority figure. Like in our natural state, we're so bad that we can't function. So we have to give up all of our power to an absolute monarch and have that monarch run our society for us because we just can't handle doing it on our own. We're just that bad. So he explains the social contract as us giving up our sovereignty to an absolute monarch and letting the absolute monarch govern as they see fit, letting him do whatever he wants because we're just so bad, we're going to launch into civil war if we don't have this absolute monarch. Okay. So we could evaluate, is this enlightened thinking? No, it's really not. It's not super consistent with the Enlightenment. And a different English philosopher is going to like kind of respond to Thomas Hobbes's view here that we have to submit to authoritarianism and an absolute monarch because we're just so bad. And the person who responds to that is John Locke. He's kind of the big person associated with the Enlightenment, and you might remember his name from 8th grade because his writing becomes influential in the American Declaration of Independence. So John Locke is an English philosopher in the 1600s. He is alive at the time of the English Glorious Revolution, the time when England transitions to a constitutional monarchy. So he actually wrote a lot of the theoretical framework for having this new constitutional government in England. So Locke has an opposing view to Hobbes. He thinks that people are inherently good, like in our natural state, we're not bad, we're inherently good. He thinks that like he believes in this view of like the tabula rasa, like we're born as a blank slate and we're shaped by our experiences. So we can be good if we have good experiences and we take information in through our five senses. But the significant part about him and the part that like I would be writing in the box is that he was the one who helped come up with all the enlightened thinking for the Glorious Revolution, for how England transitions to a constitutional state. So he said that, okay, government's jobs are to protect our rights. And if the government is not protecting our rights, then the people have the right to change their government. Because at its heart, the government is there to protect us. So his view of the social contract is that we get together, we form a government to protect us. If the government's not doing its job, then we get back together and we change our government and put in a new one that's going to protect our rights. And our rights are life, liberty, and for John Locke, it was property, that in America, it's written as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the unalienable rights. Hopefully, that's ringing a bell from 8th grade from the Declaration of Independence. So Locke's idea of the social contract becomes incorporated or is incorporated into the American Declaration of Independence. Um, and again, he would support having a constitutional government where power is shared between the leader and the people. And there's like limits to what the leader can and cannot do. And should the leader not fulfill their goals of protecting our rights, we the people can change it, because we have to give our consent to the government to govern us. So all of those things come from John Locke. Again, it's super Declaration of Independency because all of his writings became the basis of that American document, 100 years after John Locke was alive. And again, I hope all of that is like ringing a bell from 8th grade. Our next person is Baron Charles de Montesquieu. He is French, and he is an enlightened thinker that did not support the absolute monarchy. The thing that he's most known for is writing a book called The Spirit of the Laws. And in that book, he says that there needs to be 3 separate branches of government, each with its own tasks, and there needs to be checks and balances to ensure that one branch doesn't become too strong. So Montesquieu is separation of powers and checks and balances. The thing that I kind of find interesting about Montesquieu is that he has that title in his name, Baron Charles de Montesquieu. So he's actually part of the French nobility. But he didn't really like grow up as a noble necessarily. He inherits the title from a relative. So he was educated as a lawyer. So he knew about the Enlightenment. He'd read about different enlightened things. And he actually thought it was more important to have a government with 3 separate branches because in France, there really weren't 3 branches. There was pretty much just the king. There was a legislative branch, but they never met. So there was not a group of nobles that were making laws. It was pretty much just the kings. So because of that, like to some degree, abuse of power in France, having a monarch who held all the power and basically no parliament, Montesquieu felt very strongly about having 3 separate branches. And he cared enough about this to publish his ideas, even though as a noble, he might lose some of his power. If enlightened ideas were put into practice. So like he clearly cares a lot about these ideas if he's willing to publish something that goes against his own position of power in France, right? Because he's a noble. For your chart for Montesquieu, I'd be putting separation of powers and checks and balances for him. Our next person is Voltaire. Voltaire is actually a pen name. That's like not his real name. His real name is like Francois Arouet. But Voltaire is his pen name because Voltaire is a writer. He's known for writing plays and poems and satire. So as you know from English, satire is when you write things that make fun of other people. And Voltaire routinely made fun of nobles and the church and even sometimes the monarch. So the thing Voltaire cared about a lot is free press and free speech, okay? Because he was imprisoned a few times for writing things that attacked the church or a noble. Like I think in one of his writings, he made fun of the monarch or a noble, like accusing them of incest or something. Like he frequently used his satire to challenge either monarchs or the nobles or the church. And he got thrown in prison for it more than once. So the thing that he would care most about is free press and free speech. Okay, as a person that was affected by having his writing censored. Like as a person who was imprisoned for the things he would say, he probably cared a lot about free press and free speech because he firsthand experienced what happens when a monarch wants to censor you or punish you for what you say. So his big quote down here, I disapprove of what you say, meaning like, I don't like what you're saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But I still think you should be able to say that thing. That's super consistent with the free press or free speech belief. So for Voltaire, our next page, I'd be writing French philosophe cares about free press, free speech, because he was often censored and imprisoned for the things that he wrote. And all the things he wrote, again, were like satire, making fun of nobles or the monarch or the church. Oh, and I should say Voltaire is alive during the French Revolution. So he experienced like enlightened ideas being put into practice in France. Okay, our next person is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He is a French-Swiss philosopher, also kind of alive at the time of the French Revolution. The thing that I usually say about Rousseau is that he wrote a book about the social contract, and his view of the social contract is that people need to participate in lawmaking, like the government needs to come from the people. Um, he also wrote that people are inherently good, like John Locke, but that society could corrupt us. So we need to make sure that our governments are coming from the people and that we're doing the right thing instead of submitting to an absolute monarch. The other reason I include Rousseau is because he is an example of some of the limits of the Enlightenment. I said in the previous video that the Enlightenment at first doesn't really apply to women. Like, enlightened thinkers are not rushing to try to give women the right to vote or to educate them or to view them as equals. Rousseau is an example of that. He viewed women as men's helpers. So, like, not equal. He thought women should be educated only so that women could learn their proper roles so that they could be helpful to the men. So that's not like full equality. That's not saying that women should vote and work and hold leadership positions. So this would be an example of the Enlightenment not quite applying to everyone because enlightened thinkers are not pushing for full equality for women, especially thinkers like Rousseau. Okay, our next person is Denis Diderot, or in English, Denis Diderot, but he's French, so Denis is his name. His big thing is that he compiled an encyclopedia of different enlightened writings. So an encyclopedia is a book that has writings from different people in it. So if you wanted like a manual on the Enlightenment, you could read Diderot's encyclopedia, which would have writings from Montesquieu, from Voltaire, maybe John Locke. I know Diderot did write some things himself in that encyclopedia as well, because he's an enlightened thinker. And Diderot is one of the few enlightened thinkers to denounce slavery and say that slavery should not exist. So he's kind of unique in that regard. Like Voltaire, he also calls for an end to censorship and divine right to rule, supports free speech, freedom to practice religion and education. Um, Diderot did get a consequence for publishing the encyclopedia. His encyclopedia was banned by the Catholic Church, and Diderot was also imprisoned for publishing this encyclopedia. So, like Voltaire, he would probably care a lot about free press and free speech because he also experienced a consequence for publishing something that went counter to the church. Okay, next we have Adam Smith. So, I would say we don't always typically associate him with the Enlightenment. He is more of an economic thinker. They call him a physiocrat, which means someone who's trying to apply reason to like the economic world. And he is Scottish. And he is the person that came up with the laissez-faire idea. So he wanted to have a free market economy, to have capitalism, and to have supply and demand determine price instead of having like the government determining price or like a guild determining price. And again, he's the one that came up with this like laissez-faire economics idea. And he talks about it in his book, The Wealth of the Nations, which was published in 1776, same year as the Declaration of Independence. And in that book, he argued that the government needs to keep a hands-off approach to the economy, says that the government should not be telling people what they can and cannot sell or what the price should or should not be. He does think it's okay for the government to have an invisible hand, meaning like the government can have policies and laws to encourage capitalism, but that the government shouldn't be directly intervening into the economy. So, for example, during World War II, the American government told businesses, hey, like, stop making baby food, start making canned food for the soldiers. Or like, hey, Ford Motor Company, stop making cars and start making tanks for the soldiers. Or even like toy companies, stop making toys, start making bullets and ammunition. That is not laissez-faire. that would be an example of the government being very involved in the economy because the government is directly telling businesses what they need to make. Um, so Adam Smith would not have supported that. Instead, he would want the businesses to be able to kind of do whatever they wanted to do and run without intervention from the government at all. Again, laissez-faire is hands off. The government needs to keep its hands off of the economy. And this would be like a new liberal idea for the time period. Okay, and our last person is Mary Wollstonecraft. She is one of the few women associated with the Enlightenment. She is English. She's also alive at the time of the French Revolution, and she did spend some time in France. And she wrote a book called A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And in that book, she primarily argued that women should receive equal education to men. She said if women are going to be like good helpers to the men, they need to know certain educated ideas so that they can be good helpers and like possibly have some professional life and possibly have some political role. She was not super active in pushing for women's suffrage, like women having the right to vote. Instead, she was more about education. Women need to receive equal education to men so that they know like their proper place. For the time period, this is pretty new. Um, for our current time period, this would not be considered feminism because feminism is like pure equality between men and women. Mary Wollstonecraft is really just arguing for equal education, but she's like one of the only people pushing for women to have some opportunities, some rights. So she's kind of like the main face of the women's rights movement at this time. But again, nowadays we would not consider her feminist because she's not like outwardly pushing for women to, have jobs, have equal political roles, to serve in the government. Education is like her big thing in this time period. So her book argues that women should have equal education. Oh, she is also the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote the Frankenstein book. I don't think y'all I think sometimes like the juniors read Frankenstein. No, no, seniors, I think, read Frankenstein. But occasionally I have a kid who's read Frankenstein. She's the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote that book. Okay, and then lastly, the last couple blanks on your note paper. The Enlightenment's main impact is that it's going to contribute to revolutions that are seeking to establish a constitutional government. Like in the United States, our revolution to get rid of the tyrannical monarch is based in the Enlightenment, especially because we form a constitutional government afterwards. In France, there's going to be a political revolution where the people rise up against the monarch. There's going to be a revolution in Haiti. There'll be one in Mexico. There's some in South America as well. And all of these revolutions are happening in the context of the Enlightenment. So if you ever had to write an essay about revolutions, and maybe like their causes or even their impacts, your contextualization would need to be about the Enlightenment. Because without the Enlightenment, there would not be ideas about popular sovereignty, rejecting absolutism, having a constitutional government. Like all of these things happen in the context of the Enlightenment. But we also want to remember that even though the Enlightenment talks about freedom and equality, it doesn't always mean freedom and equality for all. Women and people of color are still going to be oppressed. It'll be several decades before slavery is abolished and the slave trade is abolished. It'll be even longer for women to get the right to vote. And it'll be like in the United States, it'll be at least 50 years before poor people who don't own land can vote as well. So we want to kind of remember that point. That's like a point of nuancing here. And then lastly, the Enlightenment is going to contribute to the spread of nationalism across Europe. There'll be nationalism in France. There'll be nationalism in Germany and Italy, which will lead to unification movements in Germany and in Italy. And it'll lead to people in Eastern Europe, like Greek people in the Balkans, wanting to achieve independence from the Ottoman Empire. So that's also a byproduct of the Enlightenment, is the spread of nationalism. That's where I'm stopping here. I hope all of this made sense. I can answer any questions that you have tomorrow, but hopefully if you had a good grasp on the vocab words, then a lot of this, just kind of made sense for you today.